maybe I have depression and anxiety. It was the first time that I ever let the thought enter into my head of like, maybe this is more than just feeling, worried or feeling sad.
Welcome to the Hope in Real Life podcast with Jason Gore. Our team is passionate and committed to bringing you more hope in the everyday, real areas of your life. If this conversation and content is valuable for you, please do us a favor. Like, subscribe, and even share. You never know how valuable it could be to share a little bit of hope with someone else. Let's get the conversation started. Well, what's going on, Hope in Real Life family? Thank you all for tuning in with us for this episode of Hope in Real Life. I'm here with, honestly, a good friend of mine, Ben Foote. Comes to us from the Colorado area. I'll let him give a little bit more about him in a moment. But I want to let you know what the episode is about this week. During season 1, we had some time where we talked about spiritual health, mental health, emotional health, and then we asked you as our listeners, as our audience, what's a specific topic that you want to hear about? And we heard so much about engaging this idea of anxiety and how it impacts us in our world, which is actually something that has impacted me in my life. So I thought, hey man, let's give this thing a swing. And I know Ben is someone who has spent some time challenged in this area of anxiety. And so Ben, a friend, a pastor, a husband, a dad, but more than anything, one of the most normal guys that I've ever met in my life, doesn't pretend to be more than he is, but actually really is a great man. But Ben, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I love hope. So I'm pumped to be out here for a couple weeks. You summed it up great. I'm a pastor, been a pastor for, I don't know, over 12, 13 years, something like that. Married, 3 little kids, the whole 9 yards, man.
Well, let's do this. Why don't we start out, and I'll ask you this question, and then you're probably going to want to just jump right into your story a bit, but what makes you an expert in this idea of anxiety and makes you a good guest for other people to listen into this week?
Well, I don't think I'm an expert, like, at all. I just have experience. I have a lot of experience with anxiety, with depression, with mental health, mood disorders. So I'm not expert. I'm not a psychiatrist or anything. But I've lived with it for a couple decades. So I've just gained some experience around it.
Yeah, and so to set the stage, I mean, for those of you that don't know Ben, Ben is a guy who, I mean, he is a pastor. He's a teaching pastor, and one that gets up in front of people on a regular basis and speaks with authority, but only on the basis of God's word, but stands in front of people. So a lot of people would see someone like that and think, okay, this guy's got his life together. He's got to be able to do that. He can stand confidently in front of thousands of people. Surely this isn't a guy that struggles with anxiety. Just tell us a little bit about what your journey with anxiety has been like.
Oh, geez, man. Yeah, it's really weird because I'm like part of my job is public speaking, which is like the typical, like that's one of your top 3 fears for most people. It's like, that doesn't bother me.
Right.
But having a conversation in the grocery store line, I'm like, what the? That bothers me.
Yeah, right.
College, freshman year of college was the first time that I ever was like, maybe I have depression and anxiety. It was the first time that I ever let the thought enter into my head of like, maybe this is more than just feeling, worry or feeling sadness or whatever. But I didn't tell anybody that for, I'm terrible at math, but for like another decade, man. Like I didn't tell my girlfriend, who I then became engaged to and then married. And, like I didn't tell Allie for years. I didn't tell anybody. But I first remember thinking I might have this in college. And it was another probably 10 years before I told a soul, man.
Yeah. What do you think anxiety is? If we had to put a definition to it, what would you say it is?
Well, anxiety is, I think, stems from control. So it's feeling out of control. You don't have control of a situation or a scenario. And because of that, you don't know how it's going to impact you because you don't get to manipulate it or control it, which then sends you into this spiral of, worry and fear. I think that's just anxiety. An anxiety disorder is like you can't stop yourself from knocking that first domino over that leads to this fatalistic thinking, that always ends in like, I'm going to ruin my entire family's life.
Yeah.
Why? because my dog peed on my couch this morning.
Right.
And it's like, that makes no sense. It's like, yeah, I know.
Yeah. I don't understand.
I can't stop it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think, so I've wrestled with this a bit recently in the last few years of my life, anxiety. And again, let me just say this, because you said it earlier, you're not a psychiatrist, you're not a psychologist, no. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist. So for anyone listening, please understand, no one with a microphone on this podcast is pretending to be an expert. You've just got a couple guys that have walked through this in their everyday lives and have done their best to cope with it, and have learned a little bit along the way, and would willing to do anything we can do to help others find a little bit of hope in the midst of what they might be struggling with. So for me, and this isn't anything that I found in a book or anything like that. Sometimes I try to write to help my thoughts get clear on what's actually going on in my life. And one day I wrote down, I feel like I'm stuck in between this tension of where I am right now and the absolute worst case scenario. Mm-hmm. And I just can't shake it. Mm-hmm. Like I can't shake it. And it doesn't make sense because where I am right now isn't that bad. You said, I think my dog peed on the floor. I mean, that's not the end of the world. Not ideal, right? But not the end of the world. But my family is not ruined. But for some reason, whatever that thing is at the end, and I think for different people, it's different things. But man, I just can't get away from that tension. And so then that tension, it builds and it builds and it builds. And the more that you try to not think about the worst case scenario, like you said, man, once the dominoes start going, it's like, how do I stop this thing?
Yeah. And it sounds crazy because just because it is a little bit.
Right. That's right. And it's okay to recognize that. For our listeners who like to be in control and their anxiety is kind of brought on by that, what advice would you give that you've experienced? Maybe you found some success in some areas.
Well, you have to be honest about it.
Yeah.
Because I spent so long not telling anybody about this. And I don't even know if I can articulate why. You know, part of it's like, well, I'm a man and I don't want to display weakness. You know, I just got married. I'm having kids. Like I've got to have my stuff together, right? Yeah. Part of it's that, but I just didn't tell anyone for forever, and so you're like suffering alone, silently. You know, the quiet life of desperation idea. Yeah. So you got to tell someone, man. You got to have someone in your life who, it's like, I think that the only truly unconditional love you'll ever receive in life is from Jesus. But then you can have some people who can get pretty dang close to unconditional love, you know, like you got to go talk to them about what you're walking through so that you're not doing it alone. Yeah. But dude, I went through like a decade of self-medicating in like the most unhealthy ways.
Yeah. Can you talk about that? I mean, do you feel comfortable talking about that? Maybe just for our listeners, let them know, man, this is like what normal people struggle with.
I'll share anything you can.
I'd love to hear, man. When you say
cut it if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, to be totally honest, I didn't follow Jesus in college. And that's when I started realizing, like, I think I have like an issue here. Dude, this is gonna sound weird. But I started by abusing NyQuil, which is so random, you know? And there were like also way better drugs available in college.
Right,
you know?
yeah, I was gonna say, you're on a college campus, you can do better than that.
And I tried some others, but
you were really poor.
Yeah, dude, it started with literally with NyQuil, like to help me go to sleep, you know? But it's got like this weird reaction on me where it keeps me awake for the first little bit, and then I conk out, you know? Dude, I got to the point I was taking it every night. I was taking like 5 or 6 of these things every night just to go to sleep. Yeah. Wake up the next day feeling awful. I started buying bourbon and hiding it from people, you know, and again to like go to sleep.
Yeah.
But I didn't want like my roommates to see like, dude, you drink like every night, you know. So I hid it. And there was one night where this is in my dorm room, and I had a bottle of Jack, tucked under all my sweaters, like in a dress.
Again, no offense, but you can do better bourbon than Jack Daniels. Yeah. We're stuck here on the bottom shelf.
Yeah, not in college. So yeah, I had it hidden, you know, and I took it out one night and I'm pouring myself a drink, and I just remember thinking like, dude, being the guy who's hiding bourbon and drinking it and telling himself it's just to fall asleep. It's like, I don't know if I'm an alcoholic yet, but like that's certainly a step down the road towards
Right.
it, you know? And dude, I don't know how or why I'm so thankful I was able to like that night go like, I'm not gonna do this anymore. I don't like this part of my life right now, and was able to stop. If I became an alcoholic, man, I wouldn't be here today, that's for sure. But so I was self-medicating for so long. That's just 2 examples. I've tried everything, man.
I I can relate to that self-medication thing. I remember the first time I realized, man, there's something going on, and it was kind of a long journey for me because I didn't want to admit that I struggled with anxiety, and it had a lot to do with what you were talking about. Like you feel like you got to have things together. I'll try to make this as quick as I can, but I was serving as working as what we call the role executive pastor here at Hope, and our lead pastor at the time was going on sabbatical, and so but he had been going through some things and talking about, man, when am I going to retire, when I'm not, and so he was going on sabbatical on December 24th, going to walk off the stage December 24th, be out for 10 weeks, maybe come back and preach Easter, and we give our staff, because we do like the whole 27 Christmas services across all of our campuses. So we give our staff, the week off after Christmas. And so my first day back in the office on a Monday, I think 5 or 6 people had come by my office by lunchtime and just said, hey, what are you going to do if our pastor doesn't come back? What are you going to do with like the teaching schedule after this certain amount of time if Easter comes and maybe he does preach, but then he wants to take more time off? You know what you're going to do? I mean, question after question. And my answers are like, I've got all the answers. Oh, well, listen, God cares more about this church than we do. And so he's got an answer. God's going to provide. God always provides. Look at what God's done in the past. He's going to do it again, right? So I have all the right answers and I believe him. So then I get home that night and my son asks me if I want to go for a jog. He's 12 years old at the time. I say, sure, sounds good. So I put on a long sleeve shirt and I'm about to walk out of my bedroom and I'm like, I think I'm having trouble breathing. And so I call my wife to the back bedroom and she comes back there and I'm like, it's probably nothing, but I feel like I'm having trouble breathing. She's like, well, it's not like you, but your chest doesn't hurt or anything like. And by the way, if you're just listening, I'm like, I'm not like, by most measurements, an unhealthy guy. Right? No one's going to think.
No, you're a freak of nature.
It's not allowed to go that far.
Like a literal walking G.I. Joe.
So I'm like, I don't think this should be right. She said, well, it's not like your chest hurts or anything like that, right? And I'm like, no, my chest doesn't. I think my chest hurts. No, my chest is definitely tight. And so I lay down on the bed and kind of wait like 20 minutes. We end up calling the ambulance. They come. Of course, my blood pressure was up a bit because, you start getting worried about what's going on. And man, that led me to like, I must have a heart condition because I'm fine. I'm not worried about anything. I'm a follower of God. I'm a family. I'm a man. I got this thing together. And so I end up getting an EKG. Everything looks good. They send me to get a stress test for the next week. Flying colors. Say, no, you guys are wrong. There's something wrong with my heart, with my chest. I need you guys to figure this out. So then they bring me back in, do an ultrasound of the heart. The cardiologist goes, hey, looked at the ultrasound. Looks like everything looks good. I'm like, hey, you guys probably need to go back to college or something because I'm telling you, I know I don't feel normal. You need to figure this out.
Right.
So like, fine, we'll go all in. They send me into a CAT scan, injectable dye, the whole 9. My cardiologist calls me back in and I'm sitting down. He says, I want you to sit down. I'm like, oh gosh, this is bad. I knew it. He said, I want you to sit down because I need you to hear me. He said, your heart looks as good as I thought it would have the first time I met you. You really need to be willing to consider the stressors that are in your life. And you might want to consider if this is anxiety driven.
You might want to consider going back to school.
Yeah. I said, you want to fight me right now? No. And man, at that point, I'm like, when he said stressors, I hadn't really told him everything that was going on. And the first piece that I just mentioned about the lead pastor, that was a thing. But we got this different podcast, different day. There were like 2 other major things going on in our life at the moment. It's like, okay, so this could be anxiety. And so I started walking down a road. But man, it's a real thing that we don't want to admit, but it'll grab holes. But all this, that whole story started with the self-medicating thing. Man, I can remember being in the same place. Like, hey, It's been probably a few too many nights that the kids have gone to bed and I've just, had a little bourbon and,
Right.
man, maybe I got to get this thing under wraps. Maybe I need to be honest with myself
Yeah.
about what's really
Just to
going on.
unwind. Just to unwind.
Right. It's
You know,
just
that's what you
unwind.
start telling
Right.
yourself.
That's right. How has your anxiety or struggle, battle with anxiety impacted your life for better or for worse overall?
Dude, this is going to sound wild. I really think it's in the long term where I'm at
Yeah.
now. It's not fun. I don't enjoy it. I still pray constantly for God to take it away. He constantly says like, "No, but my grace is sufficient for you. When you're
Yeah.
weak, I'm strong." Like,
Yeah.
but like ultimately in the long run, I think it's affected my life in a good way, which sounds insane.
It does. But I actually wrote down something I was going to say that sounds similar. How would you say in a positive way?
It makes me constantly reliant on the people around me, on the God I worship. It forces me to be honest and vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like, dude, when you say at the beginning of this thing, you're the most normal guy I ever met. Like, I really find that honoring because I want to be a pastor who's just a normal dude who's honest and vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And like, if I didn't struggle with either of these things, I think it would be easy for me to play the game of just wearing the mask all the time and having all the right answers all the time. And I don't want to be that person. So like in the long run, I've watched Jesus shape me into a different person because of these things that I struggle with, depression, anxiety. Like, and what sounds insane is if I could go back in time to freshman year at college and magically make it disappear. I honest to God don't think I would.
Yeah. Yeah. Your answer is better than mine, but, this is the truth for those that know me well. I'm a pretty driven guy. And there is this thing of like, okay, you got to carry yourself a certain way. And I really don't try to carry myself a certain way, to look a certain way to other people as much as, like sports psychology, almost like the positive self-speak and that type of thing. It's just ingrained in me from my years in athletics. That's like, I have to carry myself a certain way and believe a certain narrative, or else I'm not going to be able to live into what it is that I need to live into, which on some days is really good. And then on some days, terribly unhealthy. Like at some point, David Goggins does break, right? Like, I mean, and so
I don't know who that is, but I'm just confidently, I'm like, that guy's strong.
Yeah, but yeah, here's what I know. I believe God had a plan for me to step into a leadership role for this season of my life in a time where like the whole world is struggling, it seems like, with anxiety or something. Like mental health is at an all-time high. The world is changing faster than it ever has yet. Like most Harvard Business Review article I read last night says that we're more resistant to change in the workplace than we've ever been. But yet the world is changing faster than it's ever changed. So what does that lead to? Stress, anxiety, everybody's trying to make me change. I don't want to change. Had I not gone through, and if I did not have to I don't want to say deal with, because that makes it sound like it goes away or regulate.
Right.
If I didn't have to be aware of or struggle with anxiety on a regular basis, I don't know that I would be able to be as empathetic as I need to be to sit in the leadership role that I sit in. I hope some of our staff doesn't hear this and think, you're empathetic now? But the answer is yes. I mean, and it depends on the day, but man, it really does. There's something about recognizing, helping you see, man, this is what's going on in other people's lives. And it helps you slow your roll, I guess, a bit, and actually recognize, man, there's things that people are dealing with that you need to be aware of and you need to take into consideration if you're going to love them well. So,
but dude, you and I, we both follow Jesus, right? There's people who don't.
Right.
So if you don't, I guess get out there and be as strong as you can. But like you and I live in a kingdom and a worldview that's centered on like servanthood and humility, and you only lead by knowing how to follow really well.
Right.
They're like really backwards from the typical cultural view of what a good life looks like.
Yeah.
So we can't lead without understanding our own weaknesses and being vulnerable about them and offering them to other people and offering them to Jesus. So we lose, you and I lose if we put on the strong face every day.
Yeah.
I still blows my mind that most pastors feel like they have to.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is literally just like not our,
Right.
this is the opposite of our job, dude.
Yeah, that's right. And it's the opposite of hard. It should be easy to actually recognize, hey, this is just who I am. This is what I'm struggling with.
Right.
And we didn't really talk about this in the pre-production meeting for this podcast, but what you just said might be one of the most valuable things that our listeners need to hear. There actually is value in admitting your weakness.
That's just the gospel, man.
Yeah.
It's like literally everything we believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like we are not enough, dude.
Yeah. And if you don't recognize your brokenness, then you don't recognize you actually need a savior.
Right.
And so, man, it just drives us all the more to a place of like, no, we need Jesus all the more.
Yeah.
And and I'm glad you mentioned, I mean, some people don't follow Jesus. I know we have listeners that wouldn't consider themselves Christians. Man, I'll just tell you, this is why my heart breaks, because you just said it. Like, go ahead, be tough, fight your way through it. Man, at some point, something breaks.
Yeah, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
But I don't know what other hope you have.
Yeah.
So you better pull yourself up by your bootstraps, because I go learn Wim Hof breathing or whatever, go take a cold shower in the morning.
Those things are good.
I'm guaranteeing you do those.
But I'll say this, it's not enough. They're not Jesus.
Yeah, it's not going to work, man.
Yeah.
Not in the long run.
Let's do this real briefly as we get close to wrapping up. Are there any things that you've found, and again, like if you struggle with anxiety, like don't think two guys on a podcast are going to be able to necessarily make it go away. You've already said it. Like at first, number one, admit there's a challenge and probably go talk to a professional. I mean, I didn't start doing that until later in the game. Our elders here at our church, like they kind of, it's not like they said you have to, but like it kind of made its way onto a review and like strongly recommended and words like that. And so probably stepped into that a little bit late in the game, but man, so admit there's something, talk to a professional about it for sure.
Yeah.
But are there any things that you've kind of maybe come across your radar that actually helps you a bit in the moment, even if it doesn't make it go away, but if it's like, man, it's at a level 10, maybe this brings it down to a level 6.
I'm teasing you about the breathing and the cold showers. For me, like I have a routine, especially that I do in the morning, and then stuff that I do throughout the day that, and we talked about this a little before, it's like it doesn't make my anxiety disappear,
right,
but I have a better shot at battling it that day if I keep some of these parts of my routine together. Yeah. And then like on a day that I don't because I was lazy, or I didn't because, my schedule got blown up or whatever, I'm just set up for less success. So for me, I wake up, try to get up before my kids are up, just to get some time, they're 10, 8, and 5. So to get some time where I can think without answering a question, right, like constantly. For me, I read scripture, I do meditative prayer. This is going to sound like common sense to some people. It's like breakfast is non-negotiable. Like, dude, my day gets weird if I don't eat something in the morning. So like little stuff like that. I do some breathing techniques when stuff gets really, when I start to feel it in my chest and stuff. I have these little tools that I've picked up. It's just that I think that a lot of those podcasts out there or like armchair experts will tell you like, oh man, this is how you make it go away. Right. And it's like, well, that, I don't know. It hasn't gone away for me. Yeah. But I can set myself up to battle it a little bit better. Yeah. So having a routine, and then there's some stuff I've read. Dude, John Mark Comer, are you familiar with it? He's written some great stuff. Ruthless Elimination of Hurry was great for me personally. Garden City, which is a book about Sabbath, which sounds all like spiritually like, ooh, Sabbath. Right. But he breaks it down in a way that's understandable. And so I've had some resources like that, but I feel like I want to be clear with people listening. Like, I'm not saying it makes it go away. Yeah. It kind of helps me face it that day.
Yeah. And I'm going to give a couple ideas as well, or a couple things that I've experienced as well, but I want to keep elevating that. It's not that it makes it go away. And in fact, for me, that initial quest, once I realized, okay, maybe it is anxiety, the way my mind works is like, okay, so I'm going to make it go away.
Yeah, conquer it.
Yeah. Well, guess what makes it worse? Mm-hmm. Feeling like you still have something to fix and that you're not good enough to get it fixed. And it's like, man, it's like we're hurting ourselves trying to help ourselves, thinking that we're going to make this thing go away. There have been some things that have helped. Exercise for me helps. If I go on, going on a walk, a brisk walk a little bit, start breathing deeply on that. That helps.
The morning walk, man, that's another thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Getting some sunshine, but yeah, there's literally, I'm going to get the stats wrong here, but it's something that those that average around 120 to 150 minutes of exercise a week are more likely to see reduced levels of anxiety. Doesn't mean it's going to go away, like you said, but it's kind of that like, and if it's at a level 10, it maybe could take it down to a 7, or if it's a 7, it can take it down to a 5. Mindfulness is another one. That's this idea of being present, like right in the moment. And I mentioned earlier that for me, anxiety is kind of like the tension between what's going on right now, like where the situation really is, and the absolute worst case scenario. Right. And so mindfulness is like just bringing yourself to be completely focused on the present, so you see where things are and getting your mind off of how bad things could really be.
I'm curious about that. So like, what do you do? How do you do that?
Yeah. So oftentimes for me, I just try to get focused on what it is that I'm doing. And I try to tell myself, hey, this is where the situation is, where your mind is going to. You know, you mentioned at the beginning, the dog peed on the floor. I'm going to ruin my family.
It was the couch.
Sorry, the couch.
Which is worse, right?
It is worse. It's way worse. It's way worse. But it's not so bad that your family is going to be ruined forever. No. And so it's mindfulness. Hey, the dog peed on the couch. I'm going to clean up the pee off the couch.
Right.
My family's not ruined forever. You know, I've talked with a therapist who said, so what if you tell yourself best case scenario instead of worst case scenario? I'm like, what if? That's a really good idea, but I can't think of a scenario better than the way it is right now. So that makes it really difficult to do. So for me, it's just taking a look at the situation and dealing with
tackle what's in front of you.
And a lot of times it's dealing with what you can, impacting what you can, and trying to let the things that outside of your control just be outside of your control. Not always easy. And then you mentioned breathing exercises, you know, so I don't need to get into that.
Dude, I don't know how much time we have. Are we like out of time?
No, you're good. What's up? What do you got?
I was just going to say another big thing.
Wade says keep going. He's in charge.
Okay. Another big thing is like, I'm a big supporter of being a student of your culture. Like, so don't be passively shaped by the place and time that you live in. Like, you should be paying attention to it. And that's also helped me because, like, dude, we live in America in 2023. Right. And so we live in a consumerist culture, which feeds off dissatisfaction. You know, the only way to advertise is to dissatisfy you. Right. And then we live in a news media junket that's fueled by fear, you know? Right. It's like for the people who actually do watch like their hour of local news anymore, it's, dude, the world's ending. The world's ending. The world's ending.
It's a recipe for anxiety and stress.
They even have like some of these morning shows or news shows will have like, 5 minutes called like, it wasn't all bad, you know? And it's like, this old lady adopted cats for 20 years and, or some like, hopeful story. Yeah. Because the rest of it is just like the worst case scenario is happening like on your street in your neighborhood. Yeah. And then not only that, but we've got, like Wade brought it up earlier, but we've got these phones in our pockets that we're addicted to. So it's not even like, I only engage with advertising or news when I watch TV or when I'm driving and I see a billboard. It's like, dude, no, you engage with it 24/7. Yeah. And we wonder why like mental health just went poof. Right. Or I guess it would be down. Right. But we wonder why. It was like, well, dude, we're being constantly inundated with a message of fear and dissatisfaction. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head at the end. I'm surprised we're just not talking about the end, but the overstimulation that we've, because that is another thing. Like if you just reduce the number of inputs, it's a little bit easier to not feel like things are stacking.
And it's wild because it's like that might sound like, oh, wow, that's so profound. And like Jesus has been saying that for 2,000 years.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, tomorrow's got enough trouble of its own. Just focus on today. Yeah. Like that's from Christ.
Yeah. Wow.
And we've got people making, entire podcasts about it. Like they came up with it.
Could have just started there. Could have started there and there. Hey, Ben, thanks so much for being on this episode. Thanks. I know you're going to be on another episode this season where we actually talk about deconstruction, which you mentioned a little bit about being aware of what's going on around you in your culture, certainly something that's going on. Hey, for those of you, for our listeners, if this topic of anxiety is something that's meaningful to you, of course, share this content with others who you think need it. But if you've got other topics in this area that you'd like us to engage into, to or different areas of the conversation, please leave us a comment. Let us know. Communicate with us. We'd love to respond. We'd love to make sure that we're working it in. As we wrap up, Ben, I normally try to ask our guests just one or two questions, and so I'll do one since you're going to be on another episode. But what are you most hopeful for in your life right now?
To answer it quickly, I changed up the way I do ministry. So I stepped off the full-time staff at the church that I worked at for 12 years, just contracted to teach there. And I've been teaching at different churches all throughout the country, and getting to see what like God's doing in the big picture, like capital C church in America, as opposed to just like in my local church that I worked at for 12 years. And the combination of like getting to see what he's up to on a large scale, combined with the ability I've had in the last few months to like connect with my family in a deeper, cooler way, has been rad, man. I don't know if I'll be able to do this forever, but if I even did it for just a year, like it's been fantastic. So
that's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. You know, I wasn't planning on doing this. I do feel compelled. If anything that you heard in this podcast kind of connected with you, specifically around this area of, man, it being okay to recognize my weakness, because it's in my weakness where a God that I don't even know would be willing to meet me. And you talked about Jesus and what he's done. Like, if that's like, hey, I just want to know more about that, leave a comment as well. Reach out to us. Someone from our team would love to follow up with you. If it didn't, just listen to the next episode. But if it did, we want to be here for you and do everything that we can do to bring you hope in the everyday moments of your life. Look forward to seeing you next episode. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Hope in Real Life podcast. If this content was valuable for you, don't forget, like, subscribe, share. You never know how important it could be to bring a little hope into someone else's life. There's even a place here for you to comment. We would love to hear from you and hear your feedback. Until next time, let's keep sharing hope.